Well, what it does is it takes away a lot of the power of the courts to help people affect their constitutional rights. Uh, it allows any president to do something blatantly unconstitutional and not have the court be able to enjoin all similar people. You can maybe get an injunction for your individual case, but there are thousands of people that presidential policies affect. And really, you should really do kind of a sauce for the goose argument. Sauce for the goose, a sauce for the gander. You know,
Yeah.
Democrats people will be presidents and they will issue orders, and now other people can't enjoin them. There was a lot of injunctions issued against the Biden administration and the Obama administration, and now those are gone. So, the Trump people may be waving little flags and saying how great it is for them, but this is not good for individual people who want to assert their rights when a president does something unconstitutional.
And it will come around to the other party. Robert, the Attorney General spoke alongside President Trump in the briefing room today, pointing out that there were 94 federal judicial districts. Pam Bondi said 5 of those districts held 25 of the nationwide injunctions. 5 liberal districts in this country. Does she have a point?
Not really. What's going on here is those happen to have just been the 5 where the cases were brought. Now, there is a certain amount of what's called forum shopping that goes. Plaintiffs and in fact, the people who are kind of trying to prevent Joe Biden's immigration policies went down to one district judge in South Texas. So that does go on. But, an injunction can be appealed to the circuit court and ultimately the Supreme Court. And so it's not like if you have an injunction against you, you don't have another avenue for redress or didn't have an avenue. And really what the number of injunctions against the Trump regime has much more to do with the unconstitutionality of their actions, not that there's some kind of judicial conspiracy from these quote unquote liberal judges, many of whom were Republican appointed and even some Trump appointees. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that these are very questionable actions under the Constitution that the Trump regime is doing. That's the issue.
So 6'3" along ideological lines, to be clear here, Robert McWhorter. But what is it? Is there an irony here that I'm feeling that this Supreme Court is so willing to limit the power of the courts?
Yeah, I think it is. And really, given some of the justices, you really have to question whether this was the Obama administration or the Biden administration that would have brought it, or a future Democratic presidential administration, whether that ideological divide would have been the same. In other words, some of the justices that are jumping in this situation, pro-Trump, would they have gone the other way if it was a different president? And I think that has to be really a question asked of some of these justices who ruled in favor today of Donald Trump. And I think it questions their judicial consistency. So, they've created this. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett writing, federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch, Robert. She says they resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. I suspect that you would agree with that, but are there nuances here that we need to bring forth? And if this is the case, that means Congress would need to do its job as a check on the executive, and I'm not sure we're going to hold our breath for that to happen, are we?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Look, to get into the weeds of this, in 1789, Congress passed the Judiciary Act almost 200 years ago, over 200 years ago. And they provided for the power of the courts to issue different things, most of their work. The practice of nationwide injunctions have come and developed over decades. And this became a practice that many groups sought, nationwide injunctions. But again, a nationwide injunction was never a decision on the merits. It just says, look, let's stop the unconstitutional thing you may be doing and give us time to decide the case before, in this instance, you start taking away the birthright citizenship of babies. That's literally what this question is before the court. Now, they didn't answer birthright citizenship. But, the 14th Amendment is very clear. I think the administration will lose on this. But in the interim, let's not let the administration do terrible things to babies who are born in this country, to parents who are not U.S. citizens. And that's gone away now. That power and that right to seek redress to stop unconstitutional things before we decide the merits is gone.
Wow. The 14th Amendment, indeed, ratified in 1868. I think the president said 1869 or whatever. Indeed, is what this is really wrapping around here, Robert. And the court decided to hold off on ruling directly on birthright citizenship. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said that's going to come up in a separate case in October. What's going to happen here?
Well, I can't imagine the court will change it. And by the way, you were right. It was 1868. It was not 1869, whatever. It was 1868. Look, the argument that gets made is that this was just intended to assure citizenship for former slaves and overturning the Dred Scott decision of 1858, which was, of course, a terrible blight on the Supreme Court, a terrible decision. But they also intended it to implement what was the common law in the United States, which was birthright citizenship. Since the time of the founding, if you were born here, you were always a citizen. And the 14th Amendment reaffirmed that. I always give one of what could be thousands of examples, if not millions. The men who fought in the Irish Brigade in the Civil War for the Union, at the Battle of Gettysburg and other places, those men knew that their children were U.S. citizens when they were born here. And the 14th Amendment as much recognized the rights of their children as it did the rights of Black people who had been freed from slavery, and the children of Black people were citizens as well. That's what was the intent of the 14th Amendment. It applies to all of us. The Due Process Clause, the Equal Protection Clauses, that applies to all of us, and we have a better country for it. And so the argument that somehow it just related to Black people after 1868 is, I think, just spurious.